From The Times and The Sunday Times, this is The Story. I'm Luke Jones. Jeremy Corbyn's new party has its inaugural conference this weekend, but there's trouble at Mill.
I'm sorry if you are at all disappointed. For any misdemeanours on my part, of course, I apologise, but I want to make this thing work.
There's been infighting, briefing, an argument over membership data, member donations, all flowing from a split between Corbyn and his would-be co-leader.
Make some noise for Zarah Sultana!
Student debt, rising bills, genocide in Gaza. We are going to fight back.
Jeremy and Zarah seem to be at loggerheads again, this time over membership sign-ups. Sultana later described her erstwhile colleagues as a sexist boys' club.
How did this happen? So soon? And will this tricky start for your party, as it's called, mean it loses ground in a quickly reorganising left wing of British politics? The story today: is your party over before it's even begun?
My name's Gabriel Pogrund. I am the Whitehall editor at the Sunday Times.
With this story and the various splits on the left, you are the whisperer for all of this. How did that end up happening?
Is this a question that is being recorded?
It's an actual question.
Well, fair enough. Honestly, I'm not sure how, possibly by accident. I probably wasn't particularly obliging chronicler of the Corbyn era, but I then wrote a book on it with my beloved colleague and friend Patrick Maguire.
The book?
Yeah, to the extent that anybody ever wishes to read the book, we did write it, and I suppose it was quite an improbable tale, but we both ended up being much more richly sourced in that world than we might have once upon a time imagined.
Jeremy Corbyn's sort of new birth is your party. Their conference is about to get underway, their first conference. Just briefly, before we get into all the issues and everything else, I mean, what are the vibes you're picking up?
Look, the vibes are they are malodorous. They're not good. Whatever the opposite of good is, the left's history of splitism, that has ended up, characterising just the early moments and months of your party in ways which, even by the left standards, have defied belief and at times description. There are two people at the summit of this party, if one can call it that, because it doesn't fully exist yet, or at least there are sort of various competing legal entities and movements that are vying to claim the mantle of your party. But the two people at the heart of it are Jeremy Corbyn and Zarah Sultana. Corbyn, of course, legend on the left.
This is going to be community-led, community-based, grassroots-led. This is going to be very different. And you know what? It's going to be fun.
For many people, the first person since, well, she went much further than Tony Benn, but the inheritor of the Bennite legacy and the person who, provided unapologetic, full-fat socialist offer as a Labour Party leader, then cast into the wilderness, leperised by Keir Starmer. He's now, sought to begin a new kind of chapter in left politics. Then Zarah Sultana, who was a sort of young millennial Corbynite MP, had a seat gifted to her in Coventry South, but now has pretensions of her own.
We'll keep filling that vacuum that has been created by Labour's capitulation. You don't stop fascism by ignoring it or copying it. You stop it by fighting it at the ballot box, and where necessary, you fight the fascists in the streets.
And now the real problem is that the two of them and the people around them are at each other's throats.
Well, let's just explain how that happened. I think the last time we talked about your party on the podcast was September. But just explain, give us a bit of context to actually how it came to emerge in 2025 as a party.
So I suppose it just is important to just remember that, Corbyn fights December 2019 general election, loses convincingly. Keir Starmer runs on a platform of being Jeremy Corbyn in a suit, describes Jeremy Corbyn as my friend.
Not going to rank Jeremy Corbyn. He's a colleague, he's a friend, and he's led us through some really difficult times in the Labour Party.
He was Jeremy Corbyn's friend until he wasn't.
Is he a friend? Was he a friend?
No, I mean, as I say, I haven't spoken to him for 2.5 years.
In October 2020, Equalities Commission report comes out, is damning for the Labour Party. Corbyn attempts to pull the rug from under Starmer's feet by nitpicking with some of the conclusions. Starmer, in a fit of pique, suspends him. Many negotiations about his readmission don't bear fruit. And in the end, Corbyn decides that he will run as an independent in Islington North. That seals his expulsion from the Labour Party, but you're not permitted to run against it. He wins in Islington North at the last general election, alongside a number of other independent candidates across the country. And Corbyn sort of probably singular among them in that he's not Muslim, but he did, like them, stand on a pro-Gaza platform. And there's a lot of conversation, not least because of the centrist pivot undertaken by Starmer within the left as to, well, what do you do with that energy? Like,
a lot of public anger in parts of the electorate about Gaza, so lots of people on side with that.
Absolutely, yeah. Massive hostility towards not just Israel, but the government's position on Israel, its failure, as people perceive it, to condemn Israel adequately or to use its position to challenge Israel's activities in the Gaza Strip. But then also kind of Starmer's accommodation with the business community and with the markets. And whenever you hear people start talking about pragmatism, people on the left start twitching and feeling uncomfortable. And Starmer has in many ways been the midwife of this new movement. But there were a lot of people around Corbyn saying, well, even before the last election, he needed to launch a new party. And it didn't happen. A lot of people who love Jeremy Corbyn acknowledge that decisiveness is not his strong suit. It was sometimes the absence of a position that was as much of a political problem as some past pronouncement of his. And that was sort of the pattern that sort of defined the preamble to the launch of your party. Lots of talk, lots of, Corbyn breaking bread with old comrades and talking to people within the Labour Party about whether they'd defect and how do we want to do this? Do we want to be a party? Do we want to be a movement? Do we feel the need to have a whip in Parliament or a unified position? Or are we a sort of ragtag band of like-minded comrades who all agree about things in general but don't feel the need to be encumbered by anything in particular? Lots of questions, none of them answered. And then Zarah Sultana, who was surrounded by some very frustrated people and was herself frustrated by the lack of action, quits the Labour Party, announces that she is launching your party with Jeremy Corbyn. A very minor problem with this was that Jeremy Corbyn had not got that memo. Or more accurately, he had got the memo, he knew that she was about to launch the party, and per some briefings I received hot on the heels of her tweet, Corbyn and his wife, as well as many of the people who worked in his office when he was leader, were begging Sultana not to go over the top. They were saying, we're not ready to do this, we don't want this, this is unacceptable, uncomradely behaviour. And Sultana, unbowed, did it anyway, and forced Corbyn's hand, announced this thing. I tweeted, I think, minutes after that Corbyn was furious, and there were some people who
They were saying, why, of all people, would people within this movement be talking to Gabriel Pogrund from the Sunday Times?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, to be fair, it's not necessarily, there were a few people rather archly joking that, yes, the first thing Jezza would do is pick up the blower and talk to Gabriel about his displeasure at this announcement. But I happen to be armed with some pretty persuasive evidence, and I would say that this is not about exacting revenge on my occasional critics, but
it is.
But it is.
Yeah.
And the events that followed certainly vindicated what I'd said, which is Corbyn didn't even say anything for about a day. And then he put out some mealy-mouthed statement, not quite endorsing the party, but saying that conversations were continuing. Anyway, he did eventually commit to this vehicle, this venture. He's the interim sort of leader, figurehead of it. Don't forget as well that for people in the Bennite world, this being Tony Benn, sort of socialist hero, long-standing member of the Commons, aristocrat, the person who kind of mentored Corbyn when Corbyn was himself a young MP, it's not just the subject matter that matters in politics. It's not just what you believe in. It's also the way in which you execute it. These are people that were dedicated their whole lives to the idea of Labour Party democracy and the idea of grassroots politics infusing top table politics. And Corbyn's big thing is that he wants whatever party emerges to have the consent of the grassroots, as he characterises it. And for that reason, there's a conference happening this week. Is the inaugural conference, and it's going to be used in principle to set up a framework for electing a leader in due course and also deciding how the party is going to run itself. But there is much tension already between Sultana and Corbyn as to what exactly that will entail.
And maybe change the name. It's got a slightly sort of fork handles kind of gag about it, hasn't it? Your party. My party? No, your
Whose
party.
Yeah,
Your
yeah.
party.
Well, exactly. It's not set in stone. I have spoken to people in Corbyn High Command who are now feeling quite affectionate about your party.
Okay.
And they like the idea of sticking with that. But there are others who want it to be something else.
And there's lots of them to debate at this conference, but in the build-up to it, there have been a couple of factional stooges, let's say. There have been some resignations, even ahead of it. But before that, and partly born out of Zarah Sultana jumping the gun on Jeremy Corbyn and announcing his party, a massive argument over membership and data and donations.
Yes, well, data is the great commodity of politics, and there was a pretty unedifying row that exploded into public view when Sultana not only launched the party, without the consent of Corbyn, but then set up this membership platform where she was soliciting donations and names and email addresses to an entity which it transpired wasn't controlled by Corbyn. Now, I've spoken about the personality split between the two of them, but it's important to say at this point that it's not just as straightforward as Jeremy doesn't like Zarah Sultana, although I think that may nevertheless be an accurate statement now, but it's also about the people around them. So there are two factions that have emerged. One is called the Collective, and the other is called MOU Operations Limited. Now, let me attempt to put a fine point on what this is all about.
Yeah.
The Collective was a sort of preliminary entity set up by Carrie Murphy, Jeremy Corbyn's former chief of staff, a woman described in newspaper copy as a flame-haired former nurse, Glaswegian, pugilist, in all ways, a political street fighter who came up through the union movement.
Big character in your last book.
Big character in my last book. Despised by, the centrist wing of the party, became a bit of a hate figure to them, but remains by Corbyn's side.
The British media and their treatment of Jeremy Corbyn, it is shameful that we pay people's wages to see them conduct themselves like that. So I would ask people to ignore what the BBC or The Guardian are saying about Jeremy Corbyn and join in solidarity with Jeremy, who's an honest man, a decent man, working genuinely very hard to make change.
She set up this entity with a woman by the name of Pam Fitzpatrick, who I think is a councillor in Harrow. And it was a sort of network of councillors and people engaged in local politics, but it was sort of meant to be the entity that would in due course become your party, so say those around it now. But then there were some other folk, on the kind of extra parliamentary left, the sort of Labour critical left, who were sort of represented by three people. One, Andrew Feinstein, a South African Jewish anti-corruption campaigner who moved to the UK, ran against Keir Starmer in Holborn and St Pancras at the last election, took a considerable number of votes off him, by the way, on his kind of pro-Gaza independent platform.
There are definitely people who I've had to explain to them who Keir Starmer is. He's been our MP for 9 years. Some people in this area have never heard of the guy. There is a lot of anger towards him. There is a lot of antipathy towards him.
Jamie Driscoll, formerly the sort of Metro Mayor for Tyneside, and lastly Beth Winter, former Labour MP, they together set up this legal entity which was collecting money and membership data on Sultana's behalf. But they were people who are quite sceptical of the idea that Corbyn is indefinitely entitled to run the left. I mean, many of them love Corbyn and respect what he has achieved, but they are especially hostile towards Murphy and, for instance, James Schneider, another former Corbyn staffer, director of communications. There are a lot of people who believe that people in Corbyn's office between the years 2015 and 2019 had their turn, had their crack of the whip, and that in particular Carrie Murphy isn't entitled to dominate the left any longer than she has. And it's all about control and power, and a legal challenge was issued off the back of Sultana soliciting these funds, hundreds of thousands of them, by the way. This isn't chump change by the standards of British politics. And she's now agreed, after some legal letters and fairly acrimonious correspondence, to repay the money, but only in instalments, which feels like the pettiest way of repaying money imaginable.
So there's that argument over the collection of member data and that money. And then resignations in the lead to this conference. So who exactly?
Well, thank you for gently reminding me to remark upon one minor detail, which is that there are MPs who belong to your party other than Corbyn himself. So, or at least there are people who belong to the Independent Alliance, which is a kind of basically the
former Labour types.
Sort of the group of pro-Gaza independents in Parliament. But many of them also belong to your party. And actually what's really, really interesting, and I suppose there is actually a lot more substance to this in terms of what it says about our politics. Some of those MPs have now, Iqbal Mohammed Batley and Dewsbury MP, he resigned recently after asserting that the party was essentially a hostile place to small c conservative Muslims, and that identity politics had ended up contaminating your party to the extent that, there's always been this alliance between, sort of city-dwelling young progressives on one hand and then disenfranchised Muslim communities on the other. Their adhesive for some time was Gaza. The ceasefire there, though no doubt an incomplete peace, has possibly led to a bit of reflection about what exactly is it beyond the geopolitics that binds us. And the question, by the way, of where those people go, representatives of marginalised, possibly traditionally voiceless or underrepresented Muslim communities, where their MPs and how go, if anywhere, is a really interesting one. But Corbyn sort of might have been forgiven for thinking that he could rely upon their support, but it transpires that's not necessarily any longer the case. So there's some sort of splits in Parliament, splits in the leadership, and that's sort of the mood music coming into this conference.
Gabriel, we've been talking your party, our party, their party, and the difficult time it has had coming into being ahead of its first conference, which is about to start. What are the big rows on the table going into the conference, do you think? I mean, there is a question of who the leader is, or co-leader, no leader.
So I'd say there are probably two questions that loom over this event. One of them is sort of general, and the other is very particular and procedural.
Okay.
The sort of big picture question is, well, what is the point? Because Zack Polanski is leader of the Greens. He has none of this baggage, by the way. He wasn't really part of the left until recently. In actual fact, back in 20...
He was a Lib Dem.
He was a Lib Dem, and he actually picketed Corbyn at an event. He booed and jeered at Corbyn for selling people down the river on Brexit.
In the movie of this, you'll start with that scene.
100%. No. I mean, it really is what a sliding... Is it a sliding doors moment? I don't know.
Yeah.
Perhaps if Corbyn had extended the arm of comradeship, Zack Polanski would have just become a junior staffer in Corbyn's operation, and Star would not have later been born.
When Farage says jump, Labour might say how high. But the Greens will never dance to the tune of a Trump-loving, tax-avoiding, science-denying, NHS-dismantling corporate stooge.
But yes, he was a Lib Dem, and he did a lot of kind of window shopping politically, as, by the way, many people do. There's this sort of very Westminsterish idea that it's a sort of cardinal sin to happen to have changed one's opinion. But basically, Polanski, he wasn't there for Dennis Healey versus Tony Benn. He wasn't there for, the sort of perpetual civil war of the Labour Party. He basically is just offering full-fat socialism, tax the rich, use it to pay for public services, big down Israel, big up Palestinian liberation, and let's be nicer and more inclusive towards minorities.
But Corbyn would say, not full-fat socialism enough.
Well...
And that's the split. And that's why your party should exist, Corbyn would say.
I'm not sure Corbyn necessarily would say that. Well, Sultana does say that they're not adequately anti-Zionist, which... I think to some observers would seem faintly ridiculous, because you can accuse Zack Polanski of many things, but being a steadfast ally of Bibi Netanyahu is not one of them. But I think Corbyn would probably fall back on a kind of democratic politics that he wants to put at the heart of this movement. But because Polanski's done so well in the polls, polls temporary, don't mean anything, until they're vindicated at the ballot box. But, he's equaling Labour in certain polls.
Membership has shot up.
Fundraising has shot up to the tune of millions, such that Polanski himself has said they have so much money, they don't know what to do with it. And he's a very talented, fleet-footed communicator. He is, as I've remarked on our podcast, The State of It, he's a poster. He actually posts, he writes things on Twitter, unlike Keir Starmer, who he tweets about, the politics of patriotic renewal, but you can tell he cannot possibly have actually written it. Polanski actually is there on his iPhone, just partaking in the form of communication that certainly a lot of young people, but also just people full stop these days, actually experience, rather than the 10 o'clock news. And he's doing a great job of putting your party out of business before it has even got up and running. So that is the kind of one question that looms over this is...
the general existential one.
What's the point? Given that Polanski's eating our lunch, what is our thing? There's also a particular question, which is who is going to lead it and how are we going to decide who leads it? And Process. And in respect of this, Sultana has this week tweeted saying that she remains committed to the idea of being co-leader with Corbyn.
Because that's worked so well.
Because that's worked so wonderfully. Now, I put that to somebody, a few people in Corbyn's team, said, this seems utterly ridiculous. I mean, they're, as I've been told by one person, literally not on speaking terms. If they are, it's very frosty. These are not comrades in arms, and the idea that they could lead anything together is preposterous. So I was told that is all tactics designed to force Corbyn on the eve of this conference to actively confirm that he wouldn't co-lead a party with Sultana, thereby enabling Sultana to come out and say, it gives me no pleasure to do this, but owing to Jeremy's statements, I am now in a position where I feel I have to throw my hat in the ring to lead this thing myself. I'm sure Sultana would deny conducting herself with that degree of meddling and foresight, but certainly a fact that people in Corbyn land think that is what she's up to. Corbyn himself, I think, essentially does want to run it, but there are other options on the table. There's some suggestion there could be a member-led party with a member appointed as chairman and a member-led central executive committee, which is a sort of delightfully Soviet-sounding confection. But yeah, basically, we don't know what the structure of the party is going to have, and also we don't know what is even going to be decided at this conference. It could be, there are certainly people around Corbyn who have wanted it to be an event where they sort of launch a process which will in March or sometime in the spring culminate in the final appointment of a leader.